Hello there everybody and welcome to my first TouchDesigner tutorial of 2026. In today's tutorial we're going to take a point cloud and we're going to slice it in this way where we sort of reveal data line by line, a bit reminiscent to that MRI scan effect where you're moving through data in layers. The tutorial is going to be split into 3 sections, with the first section looking at how we bring in point files, the second section looking at the core effect itself, and the third section looking at rendering techniques and some additional elements that we can add into the system to make it more interesting. Patreon subscribers get first look at this tutorial, as well as access to accompanying files and project renders. Let's start off with a blank file, and I'm going to bring in 2 point clouds. I'm bringing in a Gaussian splat point cloud and a regular just PLY point cloud to show you the different ways that we prepare them in the point cloud pop. And what I love about working with pops is that it puts together all the stuff we need to work with point clouds into one operator versus what we had to do before where we had multiple tops to get the same effect. And I'm going to start out with the regular .ply point cloud. So in the point file in, I'm going to remove these normal fields, and under color fields I'm going to click and we can see that the RGBA naming convention doesn't work for this file, so we want to select the color channels that we want to feed through, so red, green and blue. I'm not going to bother about alpha. And what we can see is that our point cloud now has color attributes attached, but they're also blown out that we can't really see any of the detail. And to sort this out, I'm going to go to the Rearrange tab in the point file in. Under Scope, I'm going to select Color. And I know that the color range in this point cloud file is 0 to 255. And I'm going to say Map from Low to High, 0255, and I want to have the mapping in TouchDesigner 0 to 1. So map from 0255, map to 01. And now we can see that the point cloud has been loaded in and color is applied. Slightly different method for a Gaussian splat file. In this instance, I won't be visualizing it as a Gaussian splat. I just want to use the point cloud data. And what we can see as well is we have this wider sphere that kind of encompasses all our points. This is the edge of our Gaussian splat, and we want to access this middle bit, which I'll show you how to do later. For the time being, let's home that, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'll remove the normal fields, and under color fields I'm going to click this drop down to see what options we have. We have a lot more options when it comes to Gaussian splats than a regular .ply file. This basically gives us information that we can use for setting up that Gaussian effect, but all we really want is the color information. So I'm going to delete those color fields. I'm going to select FDC0, FDC1, and FDC2. And now we can see that color has been applied. Let's go towards the center. And in Rearrange, we'll do the same thing. We'll access the color attribute, and we can try moving these around just to get it matched more with our scene. I don't know the exact min and max, so I've been doing this more by feel, but what sort of works for me is moving up this map low until the color range feels about right. And that's looking pretty good to me. So you can kind of just tweak these in your 0 to 1 range until the color feels okay to you. You can also have something that is just a lot more saturated if that's an effect you want to go for, and you can be a lot more stylistic about it. The next thing that I often do when I'm working with these larger Gaussian splat inputs, I don't want this big sphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this into a delete. I'm going to use the bounding option. You can use either a box or a sphere. I'm going to stick with a box, and I'm going to click invert, and set my scale to, let's say, 10, 10, 10. Now we can zoom in, home that, and this is our point cloud. So that's the first step, is loading in different types of point clouds and getting the color attributes looking good. The next thing I'm going to do is bring this into a null, purely because we'd like to have the option to switch between different point inputs really easily. And this brings us to the main section of the patch where we're actually going to be doing that sort of scanning processing effect. And the effect in itself is actually fairly simple. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring us into a delete. I'm also going to create a null that's going to be right at the end of my chain. I'm going to click the blue view tag. I'll bring up my left-right panel and I'll do a geometry view. So Alt-3 or click and bring in geometry view. Arrange it just so I can see. And this is basically the end of my chain. Whatever I'm going to be putting through is going to come through here. So again, what I'm going to do with the delete is I'm going to go into this bounding section, and I'm going to use this to basically delete a set of points that I'm going to scan through. So I'm going to turn on boundary enabled. I'm going to keep it on bounding box, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the scale to 10, 10, 1. And this means that basically on the X and the Y slices, we're going to have 10 by 10, which is the same size that we've set our point cloud area to. But it also means that we're going to be slicing only one chunk of that. And what this basically means is that when we click invert, we're going to have all the points in our X, Y, so we can see that we have a full slice here. And we're filtering that by just cutting everything down from this one here. And if I go through with this translate, we can see that that allows me to create a scanning effect as I move through the shape. I'll also put this in here. Again, we can see that as I move this point position, we're scanning through. And this is essentially what we're going to set up here, is we're going to set up a method that's automated of moving through these points. And what I'm going to do to automate this is I'm going to bring in an LFO. And let's hook that up to my transform here. And we can see that's moving slightly. Let's bring in our other point cloud. So we can see that's moving. We want to move from 0 to 10. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a ramp, and I'm going to set my amplitude to 10. And I'm going to way slow down that frequency time. Depending how much data you have in your scene, you might want to play around with having different amplitudes and offsets. For this case, maybe having something like 5. And so this is the sort of the core of the effect. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to do this for different axes. So what I'll do here is I'll switch to another delete. I'm going to automate the Y channel, set that to 0 in the translate. We'll set that to 10, and let's set this to 1. So we can see we're scanning through again. Potentially adding in little value shifts as well, just to make sure that you're actually getting more of the image kind of showing up. And we'll look at how to make things show up more in the scene later. Let's copy that again, and we're going to apply this to the X. So 10, 10, 1. Let's take that, put it there. And let's just merge these for now, just to see what's happening. So we're scanning through the image at these different axes. And actually, one of the things that can be quite fun with this effect is combining multiple scans together. So now we have this scanning effect that we want to switch between. And something I'm going to do before we actually do that switch is I'm just going to look at this analyze. I'm going to look at the minimum and maximum of my input point cloud. We'll select those max and min channels and delete the P. So what we can see is we're moving from 5 to -5. So what I actually want to do is set my amplitude to 10 and my offset to -5. So now we can see that we're scanning through this whole image. What I'm going to do to create this switch is I'm going to bring out a logic chop. Then I'm going to say on when greater than 0. So we can see it's switching between these two. That's going to go into a count. And to be nice and clean, I'm going to create a null. And I'll put that into my index. So right now this is going outside of the bounds of my actual index. So what I'm going to do is in the count, I'll go to the second tab. I'll do limit loop min max. And on that limit maximum, I'll do 2. And let's press that reset pulse. So then we should have 0, 1, 2. And so that's taking our first, second, and third input. Something you can also do is you can filter by different P attributes. So in this case, I'm using the LFO and I'm filtering based on the P, X, Y, and potentially Z. Let's do that Z as well. That would just be P2. And I'll add these into my switch. And a really nice way of keeping this sort of maybe a bit more modular is in the count, rather than setting this limit maximum every time manually, what you can do is you can say op switch 1 dot inputs, and it's important to wrap this in len. And also put the dot between the bracket. And so now we can see that we have 6 inputs. Let's say I was to remove an input, we can see that that number diminishes. So this is a way to sort of add as many of these scanning operations as you like and sort of be creative. I'm just going to delete these 2 for now. So now I have my 3 scanning operations that I'm moving between. I'm now moving in these different scanning patterns through these point clouds. And what I want to do before I get to my rendering stage, where I kind of add geometry and render this out, is I want to add in a transform after my point cloud and make any tweaks. One thing I want to do is I want to up this uniform scale so that more of these points are getting hit in each of these scan throughs. And now we can see that we're getting much more of that kind of effect where it feels like we have this sort of chunk of pixels that's getting kind of MRI scanned through, which can be really nice. And obviously any other rotations you might want to make can be added in here. What I want to think about doing now is adding a bit more sort of texture and just kind of oomph to this visual rather than just working with points. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy some boxes. So let's grab a box, let's bring that into a copy. And for my scale, I'm going to create a little attribute here, just with a math mix. And all I want to do here is I want to just select A, and I'm going to use color.r for my B scale. So now if I plug this into my copy, we should get our instant boxes looking very chunky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this down to something quite small, like 0.01, maybe let's do 0.04. And then I'm going to turn on my template scale and I will use B scale. And now we can see that our points are being scaled by that color value a little bit. One further thing I want to do is I want to go to my template attributes and I want to use template point attributes, turn that on. And under names, I'm going to feed through my color parameter, which now means this is going to feed through into my network. And at this point, I'm also going to bring this into a geo because this is something I will render out. In the project, there are a number of lines that glitchily connect areas together. And the way I've created this is by thinning out some of my points. So I use a separate chain with a delete pop. Under the thin tab, I turn that on and I have a pretty high thin step. I'll do something like 1,000 because there's a lot of points in here. and we can see this is pretty glitchy. And then what I will do is I'll bring this out to a trail. There you go. And I'm going to turn this trail length onto frames. I'm going to turn it down from 60 frames to 20 frames because we don't want to kind of crash our system. We just want a few lines. And you can tweak this with what feels good for you. Let's add in another geo. And so now we can see that we have these sort of lines that are connecting as we move. And it's a bit of a glitchy way to use the trail chop. It's not the intended method, but I really like this method as a way of creating these glitchy lines that move between these points. And we'll tweak these lines a little more as we render out. I'm going to throw in a save here. There's one more element that I'm going to add in here, and this is in addition to these line glitches, I'm going to add in these sort of trailing noise particle system type points. And this is a technique I use a lot that I created as part of my pop workflow. And initially you can see it in my tutorial for iterative tentacles, where I create a feedback loop based around age and adding these particles. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a particle trail feedback loop. So what I want to do here is I want to take this delete, I'm going to add in a null. So this will be the start of my particle feedback loop here. And there are a number of ways you could do this. You could use the particle pop, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an attribute. I'm going to call this attribute age. So this is going to be the age of each particle frame by frame, and we're going to add to this over time. So this allows us to basically control the number of iterations of each particle. We can set that value to 0. I'm going to start a feedback loop. I'm going to bring that into a merge, and we're going to bring our attribute into that merge. So we're going to merge one fedback version and one version of our incoming data. I'm going to add a math, and under our attribute scope, I want to select age, and I want to add 1. I'm then going to go to delete, and I'm going to use the age attribute as a delete factor. And I'll say if it's smaller than, let's say 20, we'll flip that. So if it's bigger than 20, we'll start deleting. And we obviously haven't got to that yet. And what we can do there is we'll feed that back. And so what this does is create a sort of trailing particle system that we can see. Let's add that into a geo so we can see how this extends our system. And what I'm going to do to emphasize this more is I'm going to add in a little bit of noise. And then we can see those particles moving. It's quite a lot, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that down to like 0.4, and I'll turn up the period. But now we can see we have these sort of trailing particles sort of coming off, which is a really nice effect. If you're interested in this sort of iterative feedback particle technique, you can take a look at the iterative tentacles tutorial to get an idea again of how that works. We're going to render this network. So what I'm going to bring in here is a render top. I'm going to open my panel, and I'm going to use a camera viewport. Let's drag that onto my render. I'm going to switch to a panel view, and I'll drag out my render to an out top. So now we can see that in action. Camera viewport under camera, I'm going to switch panel comp to dot dot so we look up a level, and now we can move it around. If I press H, we're going to home our system. I'm also going to right click, open parent parameters, turn on middle and right mouse operations, which allows me to zoom in and out and also move left and right, which is pretty cool. Hit H again, home. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some textures. I'm going to keep it pretty simple for this one. On my main copy blocks, I'm just going to add in a constant. You could get funky with this and add in things like a PBR or anything that kind of like adds some kind of extra texture. But I'm just going to keep it real simple, adding in a constant on that. I'm going to add for my lines, I'm going to add in a line material. And with that, what I'm going to do is you could really bring up or down these lines, but I want them to be pretty subtle. So I'm going to do something like 1 and 1. And I'm going to set my color near and far just to white. They pop a little bit more, so maybe take them down, something smaller, and then you get these smaller lines kind of joining everything together. Again, that's up to you how intensely you do that. So you could have something a bit more intense, or you could take it down a little bit and have these sort of more diffuse lines. And then finally, again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another texture. I'm going to add a point sprite for my feedback. Something I forgot to mention earlier is it's quite important in this little feedback loop here to just make sure that at the end on this delete, you select copy topology info back to CPU, otherwise your frame rate is going to tank a little bit. Let's just reset that loop. But otherwise you should be good if you select that and maybe thin out the number of points if you're having any issues. Again, like it's just a nice little extra effect to have. So if you just want to take those points and add in, say, a particle pop and have them kind of distort based on that, that's also very possible and easy to do. So on this point spread, I'm going to tweak the level so it makes sense. I could also add in my age attribute. That's going to make things quite big as they sort of get older. So that's sort of up to you. You could add in a math mix there to just change that multiplier. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out that point scale attribute and just set my points to something that's like fairly small and innocuous. But you get that nice sort of effect as things move off. You could play with more post-production, adding blooms and stuff in, but I'm going to leave it there for now in terms of this sort of scanning through. And finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a box. Add that to a geo. I'm just going to give it a constant material. And rather than playing around with the wireframe parameter, I'm going to go to convert and add that. And I'm going to say triangle, quads, and lines to line strips. So now I have my box. I want to make it the same size as my deleted scene, so 10, 10, 10. So let's do that. Back to the box, uniform scale 10. So now that should hold all these particles. And you have something that's easier to sort of home in on. And everything's constrained to that box, which is a really cool effect. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to add in a keyboard in, and this is going to allow me to reset all these feedbacks with a key press. So let's go there, start. I'm also going to get it to reset my LFO, so I can start from 0. So this is the effect. You can bring in other point clouds and just slot those in. They probably need a different type of transform. Let's do this one a bit smaller. That's me, different orientation. You can play with the transform as well to make sure everything's aligned the same way. And you can also go in and you can have slightly bigger chunks. So you can choose how much you want to actually sort of showcase for each of these slices here. But yeah, this is a super fun effect, and I hope you enjoy playing around with it. I'm going to provide the project files for Patreon component tier subscribers, And I'm also going to provide an additional little video for component subscribers where I show how to switch between different point clouds on the fly, like I do in the video example, as well as showing a version where the particle pop is used to create these particle points in potentially a more efficient way than how this is working. Anyway, enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you soon.